Joining us this hour is Gene Baur, president and co-founder of Farm Sanctuary. Gene has been hailed as the conscience of the food movement by Time magazine. He and Farm Sanctuary remain solidly committed to their mission of ending cruelty to farm animals and promoting compassionate living through rescue, education, and advocacy efforts. For 25 years, Gene has traveled the nation campaigning to raise awareness about the severe abuses of industrialized factory farming, an ongoing topic of 21st century radio, as well as our unhealthy food system resulting from it. This causes misery, as we have recorded many times on this program with wonderful educators. It causes misery to animals, animal workers, the environment, and ultimately the consumer and human health. Gene, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, absolutely. It's great to be with you.
Well, Farm Sanctuary's work is so impressive, and I think it would be interesting to our audience if you told them how you began this work so long ago and what you did at the very beginning of your effort.
Sure. Well, we started back in 1986, so this is our 25th anniversary. And back in 1986, there was not a lot of attention being focused on factory farming and our industrialized food system. So I felt it was important to see firsthand what was going on. So we actually started visiting farms and stockyards and slaughterhouses to document conditions and take pictures and videotape. And we would literally find living animals thrown in trash cans or living animals thrown on piles of dead animals. And we could not leave them there, so we started rescuing them. And at the time, we were operating out of a donated space in a row house in Wilmington, Delaware, so we didn't have a lot of space, so we rehabilitated the animals and placed them in good homes. And then as time went, we were clear we needed more space, and we eventually got a farm up in Watkinsville, New York. We have 175 acres there. We also have a visitor program to encourage people to come up and see the animals. We also have a farm now in Northern California. But in the early days, it was an all-volunteer organization, and we actually funded the organization by selling vegetarian hot dogs at Grateful Dead concerts and other festivals.
I saw that, and I went, oh, great, a man after our own heart. And so when you began this work, I mean, there were so many of us who came into this awareness at the same time in the 70s. You know, they could call us the children, the boomer children or whatever, but I think the awareness was almost within our culture, and many people became vegetarian, but that didn't seem to impress the rest of society. How have things changed in these 25 years?
Well, I think in this past 25 years, people have really come to recognize the importance of our food choices, not only for ourselves, but for other animals and for the planet. You know, in our country today, we are facing huge health problems, and heart disease and cancer are the top two killers, and the risks of both can be seriously lessened by shifting towards eating plants instead of animals. And also, what's happened over the past several decades is that farming has changed significantly, and animals are now being confined in cages, in crates, and they're packed so tightly they can't even turn around or stretch their limbs in many cases, and they're packed by the tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands on these factory farms, and they generate enormous quantities of manure, which then pollutes the environment, gets into waterways. And animal farming also is inherently inefficient. It requires lots and lots of resources to grow meat, milk, and eggs instead of just eating the plants directly. The United Nations has also done a report talking about how the livestock industry is one of the top contributors to the most serious environmental problems we're facing on our planet today. So how we eat has profound consequences for ourselves, for other animals, and for the environment. And I think as time has gone with the Internet and with more and more information available, people are starting to see the way these animals are treated, and it doesn't feel right. And people are shifting away from eating factory farm products. And increasingly, people are shifting towards eating healthy plant foods. And that's, I think, really the best nutritional advice, is to eat whole foods and mainly plant foods. And we're, I think, right now in the midst of a burgeoning food movement where there are farmers markets popping up and growing. There are community-supported agriculture programs. There are community gardens. And so I'm actually pretty optimistic about the future. And as people become more aware and make choices that are more aligned with their own values, I think we're going to see enormous shifts. And I think we're beginning to see that now.
One of the things I wasn't aware of until reading your work, I mean, I've been doing this my whole life as well, of bringing on experts who are involved in this work or joining others in various local campaigns. But most people in our audience may not know that farm animals are excluded from most state anti-cruelty laws. I mean, this is exceptional. We're talking about some 9 billion land animals a year that are killed to be consumed or thrown away as waste product.
That's right. It really is astounding. And, most people want to believe these animals are treated with some basic decency and also want to believe that the laws apply and protect these animals, when in fact, in most cases, these animals are excluded. They're excluded from many state anti-cruelty laws because normal agricultural operations are exempt. In normal agricultural operations are practices that the industry adopts and considers to be appropriate, no matter how cruel they are. So you have very bad practices with animals in cages where they can't even turn around or stretch their limbs, and that's considered normal. You have animals that are routinely mutilated. Egg-laying chickens, for example, have parts of their beaks cut off so that they do not peck each other and injure each other in their overly confined, cramped conditions. Pigs have their tails cut off. And this is all done without painkillers. So these are now normal practices, and they're completely legal in most states. And then also at the federal level, there's the Federal Animal Welfare Act, but it excludes farm animals. So the largest number of animals that are raised in our country are excluded. And then when it comes to the Humane Slaughter Act, which ironically is the only federal law that pertains to the humane treatment of farm animals, that excludes chickens and turkeys. And chickens and turkeys comprise the largest number of animals that are being killed in our country. So the laws are extremely inadequate, and hopefully we're starting to see some changes in the laws.
Well, I saw that you all had this recent victory for laying hens. Yes.
Beginning in 2000 to 2002, we started working on initiative campaigns where we go to the streets in various states, start collecting signatures to put measures on ballots for popular votes. And we've done this in 3 states now, Florida, Arizona, and in California. And in each place, citizens have overwhelmingly voted to ban some of this cruel confinement. And the 3 primary systems we've looked at are gestation crates, which is how breeding pigs are kept, and these are 2-foot-wide metal enclosures where the sows live practically their whole lives, unable to turn around or go outside and barely move. Veal crates, which is how young calves are being raised for veal, where they're chained by the neck in small crates for their whole lives. And then battery cages for egg-laying hens. And these are small wire enclosures that are lined up in rows, stacked in tiers in huge factory warehouses that confine egg-laying hens so tightly they can't stretch their wings. Each bird is given less space than a sheet of paper to live their whole life on. And so we've got these measures on the ballots, and people have voted to ban them. And we were in the process of collecting signatures in Washington State and Oregon to do another initiative there. And the United Egg Producers actually agreed to come to the table, and they agreed to support federal legislation to outlaw these barren battery cages and to give the hens more space.
And I think, that it's so important to understand, and I think for anybody in our audience who has never looked at pictures, and I can promise you that rather than I describe them to you, you should see them. Go to www.farmsanctuary.org. Again, www.farmsanctuary.org. You have done a magnificent job at Farm Sanctuary in making this information so available, and you go through the hens, the cows, the pigs, the fish. I mean, all of the kind of living animal life that we consume as practice, rather than really understanding the consequences, not just to the animals, but also to ourselves, the environment, and I have to say, to our conscience, to the whole way in which a civilization does or doesn't progress.
It's so true. What we do to other animals says more about us than it says about the other animals, actually.
Of course.
And, Mahatma Gandhi said you can judge the moral progress of a nation by its treatment of animals. And I think that's really true. When you have animals that are so helpless and so much at our mercy, and when we treat them so badly, that's not good for anybody. And I think it requires us to be callous. It requires us to lose our empathy and our conscience, and that's a real problem.
It is, and we see it in the way wars are waged because people become unconscious from the very start, both from how we go about looking at what's on our table to how we might treat others that are the other. And to me, it's a syndrome of other, that if it's not us who's having pain, it's not pain that matters. And yet when you look at this systematic agreement by workers, by factory owners, by agribusiness, by our Congress, by the lobbyists, that say this kind of torturous, systematic ruination of the animal kingdom, human life, and the environment is quite okay. So let's talk about where the quite okay comes from. Is it economics?
I think economics are a big part of it. I think habits are another part of it, where, on these farms, bad has become normal, and the animals have been increasingly confined, and it's all, if they're confined and they're not exercising, they put on weight more quickly. So that's one of the economic reasons that these animals are packed so tightly. And they're also completely controlled. Their whole lives are controlled.
Well, they're not treated like sentient beings. They're treated like things, like they're just objects.
Precisely. They're treated like production units, like pieces of meat from the day they're born until the day they're killed. And the goal of industry is to get them to grow as fast as possible so they reach market weight as fast as possible with as little cost as possible.
Right.
So confining them is one way to do that. Feeding them antibiotics is another way to do that. And so antibiotics, half of the antibiotics produced in the U.S. are fed to farm animals.
Which then goes into our bodies.
Yep.
And our waterways.
Yep, absolutely. And then we also have the development of antibiotic-resistant bacteria, new pathogens that are emerging in the system.
Right. And so when you started looking at all of this, I mean, as a fairly young man, you've committed your life now 25 years and more to this. Obviously, more and more people have contributed to it. Is there any, I always think it's our children who, if we can educate them, I mean, you show a picture to a child at the age of 6 or 7 of how pigs are treated or cows are treated, and they'll never eat meat again. But getting that picture into the school system is almost impossible.
Yeah, it's true. We've, back in the early days, when we were first starting, we actually went to schools and we spoke at some classes, and we almost got some teachers fired because,
I'm sure,
some of the parents were farmers. But
before you pass that point, let's talk about that for a minute, because Maryland's a big farm state, and we have Purdue chicken, and it's a big problem here, and we have Johns Hopkins, which is a whole other issue of experimentation on animals. When you talk to farmers, I mean, was there a different ethic long time ago? When is that long time ago before factory farming?
Well, I think it's been sort of a constant but gradual shift towards commodifying animals and seeing them just as production units, not as living creatures. And, when I was visiting farms in Florida when we did our first initiative, and I spoke to people at the university there, they agreed that what was missing today on farms is pigmanship, this idea and understanding of animals. And I think that a lot of that shifted significantly after World War II, because after that time we had lots of resources in this country, we had lots of inexpensive oil and capital, and it went towards constructing these large industrialized operations. And as that happened, people became more removed from the animals. They became more removed from the land. They started seeing, sentient life just as commodities, and that has continued. And it's sort of reached its epitome, I would say. Although I also do believe that we are now starting to see a shift back to more sensible practices. And this is with small farms, with farmers markets, and so on, starting to spread around our country. So I think it's gotten really bad, and now there's awareness, and there's a recognition that this is unacceptable, and it needs to change. And there is some change happening, although there are still your large industry groups that are going to defend the current practice because they've invested in it, and it's profitable.
Well, exactly. And they, of course, have the biggest bucks, and they go ahead and they lobby Congress, and any sensible bill that might come through at the state legislature or at the federal level generally gets bounced right back out of committee before it even gets to the floor, which is something I have experienced in a lot of campaigns in my life. Look, we're going to take a little break, then we're going to come back, and I want to talk about some of the wonderful things you do in terms of people being able to participate in adoption, what they can do if they see something, how to help with education, and some other particulars. If you're just joining us, I'm Hieronimus, and our guest is president and co-founder of Farm Sanctuary. You can find them online at www.farmsanctuary.org. If you don't mind, Jean, for a moment, I'd like to come back to something you said in the very beginning. You were one of the very first groups of people to get into farms and factory farming to be able to film and document what was going on. Can you share a little bit about that time period in this work and what that was like?
Well, it was pretty rough, as you can imagine, going into these places. And at the time, the industry was a little bit less wary of visitors. So right. I was often able to just walk in and take videotape and pictures of what was happening. And, it was horrible to see the way these animals were neglected and mistreated, the way they were suffering, the way they were routinely denied veterinary care. If they weren't worth very much, they would literally be discarded. And I also felt very bad for the workers. Could you imagine what it would be like to work in a slaughterhouse where for 8 hours a day all you're doing is cutting the throats of animals? It's a violent, bloody job, and I really wish nobody had to do it.
Well, and I think, post-traumatic stress, and Gay Bradshaw joined us on that. We talked about even the elephants who have post-traumatic stress just from the way the world is, and we see this with workers in these kinds of environments. I mean, it's no different than taking a life unmercifully, so it has to affect people. And I've read studies of the kind of trauma that they suffer and that they leave these factory farms, but so many are migrant farmers and they believe they have no other resource to work.
No, it's true. It's very sad. And also the workplace is very dangerous, so oftentimes these people are injured and they don't feel that they have recourse, so they are injured, and it's just bad all the way around.
And so when you were doing this, I mean, the surreptitious filming, which you would have to do today, because as you point out now, even to go to a feedlot, you have to sign in. They need to know who it is. You have to be escorted. I mean, to go film even the way they drag these poor dear cows, the downers, and just drag them suffering and dying to be slaughtered. It's indescribable. I mean, to be quite frank, I am so in awe of you and other people that do this work day after day. I think I would have an emotional breakdown.
Yeah, no, it is very hard. One of the things that made it manageable for us at Farm Sanctuary is that from time to time we were able to rescue animals.
Let's talk about that and how you do that, and how others in the listening audience who might have acreage or might know somebody who has a farm or may themselves have an interest in helping as volunteers, what they can do.
Well, at Farm Sanctuary, we rescue these animals and take care of them at our farms, but we also have an Adopt a Farm animal program. So if anybody has acreage and is interested in adopting animals, we would love for them to contact us, and they can do that through our website, which is www.farmsanctuary.org, and we'll send you an application. And we want to make sure that when we place animals that they go to good homes, as you can imagine. But if there's people out there that have acreage and proper facilities and an interest, we would love to hear from you.
Share with us, as an example, because I was on your website, I had an opportunity to really tour around and see how some of these animals came to you. But pick one of the stories for our audience and explain how the animal was found and then what happened.
Well, I'll mention Opie, who I actually rescued from a stockyard in upstate New York. And this was a number of years ago. And I was visiting the stockyard, and I came across this young calf who was left for dead in an alleyway. And it was a freezing day, and he was very young. In fact, he was still wet from after birth. He was sent to the stockyard on the day he was born, and he was freezing to death. And so I asked the stockyard worker, what's going on with this calf? And he told me, well, I have to bury him later today. I said, well, what if I take him off your hands? And he said, sure, go ahead, take the calf. So I took the calf to a local veterinarian, and his temperature was so low it wouldn't even read on the thermometer. He was dying of hypothermia. But we brought him back to the sanctuary, got him warmed up, took care of him, gave him necessary fluids and other nourishment, and he recovered, and he ended up living with us for more than 18 years and weighing nearly 3,000 pounds.
Wow. And now there's some people, I'm sure, in the audience who are thinking, well, you guys are talking like, they're just a cat or a dog. And yet I think that's important to talk about for a moment, because there are millions and millions of households that have cats and dogs and birds and rats and cat and mice and, all their little animals. And nobody would ever think of killing that animal and eating it, or killing it alive and eating it, or dismembering it while it lives.
Yeah.
And yet that is, in fact, what happens in these enormous factory farming systems.
You're absolutely right. And I think the reason is that when people get to know these individual animals, whether they're cats and dogs or other animals, you understand that they have emotions, that they have personalities, basically, that they have likes and dislikes, that they develop relationships with other animals and with people, that they're not really that different than us. And the same could be said of cows and pigs and chickens and turkeys and these other animals that have been unfortunately exploited terribly and then slaughtered and then consumed in our country for decades, or for more than that. So one of the messages of Farm Sanctuary is that these animals have feelings just like cats and dogs and other animals, and that's a big part of our sanctuary work, is to encourage people to come and meet these animals, get to know them, look into their eyes, spend some time with them, watch how they interact with each other and with us, and get to know them, connect with these animals. And when that happens, the idea of killing them doesn't appeal very much. And, most people have empathy. Most people care about others. Most people don't like to see cruelty. And unfortunately, when it comes to farm animals, though, most people just don't spend much time with them.
And don't know. And at the same time, we've had this incredible decimation of the small farm, really the backbone of our agribusiness in this country. As I joke, and many real serious scholars have said, it got all replaced with methamphetamine labs.
Yeah.
And, there's really these horrible stories. I'm going to have a guest on who's written a book about the demise of a town in Iowa because of that. I'm being told we have to take a little break. So, Jean, you hold on to our audience. Go, in the meantime, to www.farmsanctuary.org. That's www.farmsanctuary.org, and we'll be right back. So I wanted to come back, Jean, to something you said about education and how we can make changes. For those in the listening audience, you mentioned that, for instance, you have an adoption program. What else does your website present that they can utilize, whether they're school teachers or grandparents, in really helping the next generation appreciate that they can make a change that's profound on all levels?
Yes, well, on our website there's lots of information about what happens to animals on farms. So for people interested in learning more about our food industry, that information is available. We also have information and heartwarming stories about individual animals who live at Farm Sanctuary that people can check out. And we have pictures and videotape of both, happy animals at Farm Sanctuary and of unhappy animals that are being mistreated on factory farms. And there's also lots of information about plant-based eating and shifting away from our typical American diet, which is very heavily laden with animal foods and which is bad for animals, and it's terrible for us and terrible for the environment. So there's information about shifting our diets and eating in a way that is healthier and also that is more aligned with our values. And I think that's a very important point, is that most people are unwittingly supporting a cruel factory farming system without really thinking very much about it. So we encourage people to think about their food choices and to become mindful of them, and then ultimately to make choices that they can feel good about, that are aligned with their interests. And that would mean, I think, in most cases, if not all cases, shifting away from factory farming and towards eating more plant foods.
Now, the industrialization of our food supply came along with the large uses of insecticides and fungicides and all these leftover products from aluminum and other things out of World War II. And when you look at even the devastation to our topsoil, people say, well, you can't get the nutritional needs that you have, either it's protein or minerals from the plants. And then they make an argument for, but if you eat an animal who has eaten some of these things, you get what you need. So for somebody in the audience who might not really appreciate that, even if they reduced meat eating to once a week, what a difference it would make in their health and this process.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've been a vegan since 1985, and I get everything I need from plants instead of animals. Some of our the best athletes ever have trained as vegans and done their best work and their best times as vegans. For example, Carl Lewis, the Olympic athlete, he did his best times in track when he trained as a vegan. Dave Scott, who has won the Ironman triathlon more than anybody else in Hawaii, trained as a vegan. So, you can get everything you need by eating plants instead of animals, and you can also perform at a very high level athletically that way.
When you talk about adopting farm animals, I want to come back to that for a moment because you do so much of it. You mentioned that you have 2 different sanctuaries, and I did want to make one point. There's a lot of sanctuary work going on for elephants and chimpanzees and all kinds of abused animals around the planet, and sanctuaries are, thank God, popping up here and there. But I've interviewed a number of sanctuary founders, and we all sort of agree that we don't want the creation of sanctuary to be a long-time business. It's kind of like the short-term interval until we can make living a sanctuary.
I love the sound of that, yes. Our sanctuaries, we have 2 of them, one in Watkins Glen, New York, and one in Orland, California, and these basically have been set up to take care of refugees of an abusive system. And ideally, we would love to put ourselves out of business so we didn't have to rescue animals from these cruel systems.
And when you say you have the 175-acre farm in upstate New York and 300 acres in Northern California, how many animals and what kind of animals are on the farms?
Well, between the 2 farms, we have nearly 1,000 animals right now, and that includes cows, pigs, chickens, turkeys, ducks, geese, sheep, and goats. And we have some donkeys at our farm also out in California. And these animals, once they come to us, get to live out their lives. They're our friends, not our food. And people are welcome to come visit. We have events at the farms. We have overnight cabins where people can actually come and stay overnight at Farm Sanctuary and wake up and look out off of their porch and see pigs out there rooting in the soil and see cows out grazing. They can see happy animals on a very peaceful farm. It's a very beautiful experience.
Do the cows get milked? Do the goats get milked? Is cheese made? Or is this simply a place where these animals rest until they live no longer?
This is a place where the animals simply get to be who they are. Mm-hmm. And so we don't generally need to milk them. And the reason is that the only time that a cow would have milk or a goat or other mammal would have milk is if they've given birth.
Right.
And then they start lactating. And that's why on dairy farms today, these cows are forced to have a calf every year who's taken away from them. And then the calf is raised for veal if it's a male, and if it's a female, will be raised to become a milking cow. And then the cow's milk is taken and sold for people, of course. But at Farm Sanctuary, if an animal comes in pregnant, she'll be allowed to give birth and nurse her young. So those are times when we would have lactating females. But otherwise, they're not bred, and so they're generally not, they do not need to be milked. Although we have gotten some from dairy farms who we've had to milk temporarily until their udders dried out. Because, once you have a lot of milk, you have to be milked.
Just out of curiosity, what's your feed budget a year?
Oh gosh, I don't know exactly, but it's probably over $500,000.
Yeah, that's what I would guess. I remember interviewing a small sanctuary in one of our states. I can't remember which one, and her food budget was $300,000 a year. This was for horses, I think it was. It was a sanctuary for horses. And so when we look at this extraordinary, and you have a wonderful staff of people, and your board is just so diverse and so involved. If somebody in our audience wants to make a donation, explain where that donation goes.
Well, people who donate to Farm Sanctuary help fund our shelter work and our direct animal care and rescue work and our placement work for the Adopt a Farm Animal program. And they also help fund educational efforts and advocacy efforts. In addition to caring for animals, we want to raise awareness and encourage citizens to eat in a way that is more sustainable and more humane. And we also want to change laws to protect animals from cruelty. And we've had some success there. We've been able to pass laws to outlaw some of the worst confinement systems in a handful of states. And so we're now working on federal legislation, and we'll keep pushing for that as well. So donations to Farm Sanctuary fund our rescue, education, and advocacy efforts.
Now, I understand that there's going to be the first national conference to end factory farming for health, environment, and farm animals. Who can go to that?
Oh, we invite everybody to come. Anybody who's interested is welcome to attend. And we have a website, which is www.factoryfarmingconference.org. And our intent is to raise awareness about this problem, to engage people and to empower people to go make a difference when they go home from the conference.
As you pointed out, CSAs, community-supported agriculture, community gardening, small sustainable farming is really enjoying a renaissance in this country. And, I always sometimes wonder why we don't have sort of bond investments for these kinds of things, for earth care careers, for animal care careers. Is there any part of the world that you can point to and say, look, these guys do it right? Is there a model for the right way to do this?
It's a really good question, and unfortunately, I cannot come up with a model in any nation. I think that we're seeing some models popping up in the United States in certain communities where we have community gardens, and we have, even in some schools, there are gardens. So there's starting to be some really good examples that I think will continue to spread because they make so much sense, where people are getting healthy food, they're getting local food that's very affordable, and they feel good about it. It's really nice to go out in the garden and pick your food and eat it. Something really satisfying about that direct connection to earth and to our sustenance.
Yeah, I agree. A few years ago, I was trying to get a book to a publisher, and I hadn't heard from them, so I assumed it was a rejection. And I said, okay, I know what I'll do this year. Let's start a farmette. And so, indeed, of course, the publisher came back about 3 weeks after I'd started it and said yes to this book. So there we are building a farmette with our hens, and we're having eggs. And it was a big learning experience. And now we have hens who are no longer laying eggs, and they're just going to stay with us until they live no longer. And somebody said to me, but that's like having pets. I said, well, they're really not pets, but they're sentient beings, and we love them, and we take care of them. And, when people say, well, what's the point? All I can say to them is, well, we care for them because they're alive.
Right. Exactly. Sometimes, animals just deserve to live, they enjoy life. And we can learn from them while they're alive as well. If we observe them and we can be enriched, our lives can be enriched by positive relationships with other animals. People who've spent times with cats and dogs, for instance, have lower stress levels. Sometimes when cats and dogs visit hospitals, they really help people who are injured or ill or suffering. So our connection with other animals, and if it's a positive connection, can really be good for us emotionally.
When we look at also the relationship, this sort of trans-species communication that happens, I love that term that in trans-species psychology that Gay Bradshaw and some others have really brought into the psychological awareness movement, is that this is a whole earth relationship. We're not just talking about how to be nice to chickens and how to be nice to pigs. What we're talking about really is the overall system in which we treat the life of the earth and all life on the earth.
That's so true. It really has to do with our attitude towards other animals and the earth and our relationship with other animals and the earth. And the question is it a relationship based on exploitation and cruelty and continuing to extract value, extract raw material, or is it one where we invest, where we live in a more symbiotic way, where we have empathy and compassion to other animals and to the earth, and frankly take more responsibility for our behavior and behave in a way that we can feel good about. Because right now the way we're treating animals on factory farms is atrocious, and most people say, I just don't want to know, don't tell me about it.
Right,
and
that's exactly
not
right.
taking responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've always thought, if they just put a picture of what it really looked like on the McDonald's hamburger, of what the cow went through, how many people would still line up to buy these fast food? And I've interviewed a number of people, including John Robbins, over the years about the enormous amount of change in agribusiness as a result of fast food, that it's basically fast food farming.
Yes, it's mass production, cheap food paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
But this cheap food actually comes with some significant costs that we don't adequately account for, and our health care is one of those huge expenses.
Exactly, plus a diminished life, a quality of life. I mean, I joke that now when I first became vegetarian back in 1972, I think, and as a dancer traveling the country, there was never anything to eat. no matter where you went, you had to go to a foreign restaurant basically to find some grains and some vegetables. Whereas today, it's true. You can go anywhere in this country and eat a healthy vegetarian diet, and a good one.
Yes, it's getting easier and easier. It's so wonderful. There's lots and lots of new vegetarian restaurants in Baltimore, in New York, in L.A., and even in places like Omaha, Nebraska, you can get vegan food. So it's really spreading. It's really positive to see.
You know, I interview so many wonderful pioneers, of which you are one, and one of the questions I love to ask them, from astronauts to, people who do film or whatever, how has this work changed you, Gene?
Well, when I first started doing it back in 1986, I had a general idea of what was happening and that this factory farming industry was a problem. But as time has gone, my convictions have actually deepened, and my dedication to this has become stronger and stronger. But I've also, I think, become more patient and more understanding of people that are engaged in these businesses. Oftentimes people start working at factory farms or investing in them or setting them up even because they believe it's a good thing to do. Farmers are hardworking people, and they want to do well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really about education and reaching people and being compassionate, even to people that you feel are doing really bad things, and just trying to find alternatives and try to appeal to people's better natures.
Well, and I think that's a really key thing. I remember as a young activist, we were always screaming and yelling at the others as the horrible things they were doing, and it took some real maturing to appreciate exactly what you just said, that people generally, when given the right information, will make the right choice. And it's about having compassion for those who have a different perspective and a different lifestyle than your own, but how to find some middle ground that brings everybody to a better place.
Exactly. It's really about finding common ground.
Mm-hmm.
And I think rooting our efforts in, people's better angels.
Mm-hmm.
Most people are compassionate. Most people don't like cruelty. Most people do have empathy. Most people want to live on a planet that is healthy and is not being polluted, where resources are not being squandered. Most people would rather be healthy instead of dying of heart attacks.
There's also, I understand, that you have been just returning, I guess, from Chicago, or maybe you've not gone yet. There's an annual walk for farm animals.
That's right. We're doing these walk for farm animals events all over the country. I just came back from Chicago. In fact, I just arrived back here in Washington, D.C. today.
Thank you for joining us after that.
Oh, I'm so glad to do it. And to find out about it, people can go to the website, which is www.walkforfarmanimals.org. And you can sign up there, and the more people that participate, the better. It's going to be a really great event, a very positive event, and we're just joining together to raise awareness and to raise funds for Farm Sanctuary's work.
Oh, that's wonderful. Okay, everybody has an opportunity to actually take part and stand up for the animals that can't speak for themselves. And if you were to sort of, cast the fairy dust across the nation, what would this change look like? I mean, if we were really able to forecast, if you were, a diminishment of this butchery and unmerciful treatment of animal life, how do you think that would affect other parts of our society?
Oh, I think it could be profound. And, what I envision is a world where we're living with other animals in a peaceful, humane way, where we're not killing and exploiting them for food. And the way we would be getting food is through small local farming operations. And in addition to small farms, there would likely be more urban agriculture. And we're starting to see this. We're starting to see rooftop gardens, for example.
Yeah, there's a wonderful one I saw in Brooklyn, a fantastic urban rooftop organic garden. And, I think that I remember it was almost 27 years ago, I and another woman, we tried to convince the municipality in Baltimore to turn this big public field called Rash Field into an urban agriculture center. Of course, nobody understood what we were talking about 27 years ago, but now the municipalities actually provide land within the community and vacant lots, and it's phenomenal that there's funding in our cities now to actually do this.
And that's very good for neighborhoods. And it also, softens urban areas to have plants and grass growing or vegetables growing. There's also a food not lawns movement with people who have lawns are starting to tear up their lawns and plant food.
Right, right, which I have seen some beautiful demonstrations on less than a quarter acre feeding a family of 6 really well. So
Yes.
you
So,
don't.
so that's the type of agriculture I think that we need to move towards, and there are small signs of it happening. And I think we need to dismantle this industrialized farming system where we're growing tons and tons of feed crops like corn and soybeans, which are very chemically dependent to feed animals for meat, milk, and eggs. And we don't need to do that. We could move towards plant foods as smaller farms, more efficient farms, more local food, more organic food, and just people more in touch with the land. So that's the direction I think things need to go.
Well, and it is true that in all domains in which there's been this kind of nonprofit activism, I've worked most of my life in the field of healthcare and holistic healthcare, and to think that when I started our center 25 years ago, there was nothing like it in the country, and now you can go and get acupuncture and homeopathy and nutritional guidance in almost every major city, and even in the counties I add, in most of the states of our union. And so, Jean, when you look at this work, and anybody in the audience who's saying, well, I would like to do an adoption, you mentioned you can go to the website. What kinds of animals are adopted out?
We have all kinds of animals. We have, cows, pigs, sheep, goats, chickens, and turkeys. All these animals that, are generally seen as food, we see as our friends, and we place them in homes where they're going to be allowed to live out their lives. And, people can go to the website, which is farmsanctuary.org, and see some of the animals that are up for adoption, some of the animals that we care for there. And we're always looking for good homes, because whenever we can place an animal in a home, we're able to rescue more.
Does the 4-H Club of America, how do the organized farm community respond to this?
Well, the 4-H and Future Farmers of America and those sort of youth agricultural programs have a different perspective than we do. They unfortunately teach children that these animals are basically commodities to be raised and killed. And we've talked to some kids that have been through 4-H and have really been traumatized by it, because they get to know a sheep or a pig or another animal and get connected with this individual, and then they're made to sell them to be slaughtered. And it's sort of a mixed message, and children have a natural tendency
to know hypocrisy when they experience it. I used to interview the 4-H Club every year at the Maryland Fair, and I would always say to them, I don't know how they do it. I could never have done it. I had a goat, and I had, a lamb, and we didn't eat them. They were pets. I mean, literally, because my mother, just wanted us to have exposure, and we all loved animals. I just don't understand how anybody can do it.
Yeah, no, I don't either. And that's, one of the problems with 4-H and Future Farmers of America. Although they do now have programs where people can learn about growing plants and quilt making and other sorts of crafts. So it's not all bad. But when they take animals and basically desensitize children to see these animals as just pieces of meat to be slaughtered, that is a problem in my view.
It's an interesting challenge that we all face. I mean, in almost every domain in which we do air work, everybody's working to create some sort of new paradigm of consciousness where the consciousness matters, where our relationship to all life is the work. It's not something afterwards, but that is the work. The journey of how we treat the earth and how we treat each other and how we treat the animal kingdom is the work of living.
It's so true, and to do it mindfully and thoughtfully and in a way that we can feel good about, that is empathetic and is compassionate and is not harmful to other animals, not harmful to our bodies or to the earth, and just living in a way that is aligned with our values and aligned with our interests and leaves a lighter footprint on the planet. And it's very empowering to go that direction. And as you say, it happens every day. It's just the way we live our lives. And, Gandhi said, my life is my message. And, he's also said, be the change you seek in the world. And I think it's so important for each of us just to think about how we live and to make choices that we can feel good about, that are aligned with our values and our interests.
I agree with you entirely, and it's interesting because there have been different stages in my life. I've been an activist in many different fields, but there was a time that I had to, after covering current events for 10 years, really have taken the last 10 years in a very spiritual retreat and studied Kabbalah, and I've written 2 books, and now I'm sort of coming back out into the world of doing from day to day in various nonprofit sectors. And I work with a wonderful farm here in Maryland called Kayam Farm, which is at the Pearlstone Retreat Center, and they have brought to it the Jewish texts of teaching about how you treat animals, as well as an understanding of the natural cycle of how to do small, sustainable farming. They have a great garden, and they have... Anyway, it's a wonderful movement that really is happening with lots of people in their 20s and 30s and young homesteaders who are really trying to live a conscientious life. Look, we have just about a minute left. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us?
I guess I would just encourage people to go to the Farm Sanctuary website, which is farmsanctuary.org, and just to recognize how important our food choices are. The way we eat is perhaps one of the most important decisions we make every day. It has profound impacts on other animals and on the earth and on our own health. And just being thoughtful about it and doing what we feel good about can make a world of difference.
Well, I want to thank you. And again, remember, ladies and gentlemen, there is going to be the first national conference to end factory farming for health, environment, and farm animals. You can go to www.factoryfarmingconference.org. And I want to thank you for the tremendous work you and your organization do and for taking time after such a busy day today to join us.
Oh, thank you so much. Really appreciate the opportunity.
21st Century Radio is produced by Hieronimus and Company. Our executive producer and research assistant is Laura Kortner. Our engineer is Noah Dankner. I'm Dr. Zohara Hieronimus, and we hope you enjoyed the show.